His last interview was supposed to be 30 minutes. It lasted 6. The journalist said Kurt kept looking at the door like he was waiting for someone who never came. The tape recorder was running. The journalist checked it twice to make sure. 30 minutes. That's what Kurt's management had promised. Enough time for a decent feature article. But 6 minutes in, Kurt Cobain stood up, said, "I think we're done," and walked out of the room. The date was March 1st, 1994, 36 days before he died. The journalist's name was John Savage. British music writer, highly respected, had interviewed everyone from the Sex Pistols to Morrissey. He'd been trying to get a proper sit-down with Kurt for 2 years. When the call finally came from Nirvana's management in late February, Savage booked the next flight to Los Angeles. The interview was scheduled at the Exodus Recovery Center in Marina del Rey. Kurt had checked himself into rehab again, trying once more to get clean. Management thought it would be a good setting, controlled environment. Kurt couldn't leave early, or so they thought. Savage arrived with his questions prepared. He'd done his research, read every previous Kurt Cobain interview, watched every piece of footage. He knew the patterns, knew that Kurt deflected personal questions with sarcasm, knew he hated talking about his lyrics, knew he was more comfortable discussing other bands' music than his own. But Savage also knew something else. This might be the last chance to talk to Kurt Cobain before everything fell apart. The European tour had been a disaster. The Rome incident had nearly killed him. Nirvana was fracturing. This interview mattered. They met in a small conference room. Kurt was alone, no publicist, no manager, no handler to cut things short if the questions got uncomfortable. Just Kurt, Savage, and a tape recorder on the table between them. "Thanks for doing this," Savage said, pressing record. Kurt nodded. Didn't smile, looked tired. His blonde hair was unwashed, hanging in his face. He wore a striped shirt that looked too big for his thin frame, but his eyes were clear. More clear than they'd been in months, according to those who saw him regularly. Savage started with safe questions. "How's the recovery going? How long are you planning to stay here?" Kurt's answers were short, polite, but minimal. "It's going okay. Not sure yet," the kind of non-answers he'd perfected over years of interviews he didn't want to do. 3 minutes in, Savage shifted approach, asked about the new songs Nirvana had been working on. Had Kurt been writing during the break from touring? Were there plans for another album? Kurt's posture changed. He sat forward slightly. "We recorded something in January," he said. "At Robert Lang's studio. One song. I don't know if it'll ever come out." This was the most engaged he'd been since sitting down. Savage pushed gently. "What was the song about? Why the uncertainty about releasing it?" "It's about..." Kurt stopped. Looked at the ceiling. "It's about saying something you can't take back." Savage waited. Didn't interrupt. This was the moment every journalist hopes for, when the subject drops their guard and says something real. But Kurt didn't continue. Instead, he looked at the door. Not a quick glance. A sustained stare. Like he was expecting someone to walk in. Savage noticed, but didn't comment. Tried another question. "In Utero came out 6 months ago. Are you happy with how it turned out?" Kurt pulled his attention back from the door. "Steve Albini did what we asked him to do. It sounds raw. It sounds honest. Whether I'm happy with it..." He trailed off. Looked at the door again. Savage checked his watch. 5 minutes had passed. He had 25 left. Decided to push harder. Asked about the criticism Courtney had been receiving from the media. Asked about becoming a father. Asked about the pressure of fame. Kurt's jaw tightened. "I don't want to talk about my family." "Fair enough," Savage said. "Let me ask you something else. When you write..." "What time is it?" Kurt interrupted. Savage told him, 2:47 p.m. Kurt stood up. "I need to go." "We still have 24 minutes, Savage said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I think we're done." Kurt was already moving toward the door. Savage quickly asked one more question, the one he'd been saving. "Kurt, if you could say one thing to everyone who's listening to your music right now, what would it be?" Kurt stopped, hand on the doorknob. Turned back. For a moment, Savage thought he might sit back down, thought he might actually answer. "I'd tell them to stop listening," Kurt said. "Find something else. Find something that makes them happy, instead of sad." Then he opened the door and walked out. Savage sat alone in the conference room with his tape recorder still running. He let it go for another minute, capturing nothing but silence. Then he pressed stop. The interview was never published. Savage tried. Sent his editor the transcript. 6 minutes of mostly nothing, punctuated by Kurt's strange final statement. The editor rejected it. "There's no story here," he said. "It's just a guy who didn't want to be interviewed." But Savage kept the tape, and over the years he played it back occasionally, trying to understand what had happened in that room. Why Kurt kept looking at the door. Why he'd seemed almost anxious, almost frightened. In 2004, 10 years after Kurt's death, Savage finally wrote about the interview, published a piece in Mojo magazine called The 6-Minute Interview. In it, he revealed something he'd never told anyone before. After Kurt left the room, Savage had waited a few minutes, then packed up his equipment and headed for the exit. As he was leaving Exodus, he saw Kurt in the facility's garden area, sitting on a bench. He wasn't alone. A woman was sitting next to him. They were talking quietly, their heads close together. Savage couldn't see the woman's face, couldn't hear what they were saying, but he saw Kurt's body language, saw how tense he was, saw how he kept running his hands through his hair, a nervous habit Savage had noticed during the interview. The woman handed Kurt something. Savage couldn't see what it was. Something small enough to fit in Kurt's hand. Kurt looked at it, then put it in his pocket. The woman stood up and walked away. Kurt stayed on the bench, alone, staring at nothing. Savage never found out who the woman was, never asked. By the time he thought to investigate, Kurt was dead, and it seemed invasive to pry into his final weeks, but the image haunted Savage, because of what it suggested, that Kurt had been waiting for someone during the interview, that he'd been distracted, anxious, watching the clock because he had somewhere else to be, someone else to meet. Chris Novoselic, when asked about Kurt's final weeks, said something revealing. He was different in March. Chris told Rolling Stone in 1995. He was making plans but also saying goodbye. It was confusing, like he knew something we didn't. Dave Grohl echoed this in his memoir. "The last time I saw Kurt, he told me he loved me. He'd never said that before. We weren't that kind of band. We didn't do emotional declarations, but he said it, and I didn't know how to respond." The 6-minute interview exists in that same strange space, a moment that feels significant in retrospect, but meant nothing at the time. Kurt cutting an interview short wasn't unusual. He'd done it dozens of times. Journalists were used to it, but this one was different. This one Kurt seemed to want to leave, not because he was annoyed or bored, but because he needed to be somewhere else, because someone was waiting. John Savage kept digging over the years, talked to other journalists who'd interviewed Kurt in those final weeks, found a pattern. A radio interview in Seattle, February 12th. Kurt kept checking his watch, left after 15 minutes. A photo shoot for a magazine, February 20th. Kurt arrived late, seemed agitated, left before they'd finished. A phone interview with a European journalist, February 25th. Kurt said he had to go after just 8 minutes. The journalist heard a door opening in the background, heard Kurt say, "I'll call you back to someone," then the line went dead. Everyone who interacted with Kurt in those final weeks noticed the same thing. He was distracted, looking elsewhere, waiting for something. The question Savage couldn't answer was simple. What was Kurt waiting for? There are theories. Some people believe Kurt was planning his death, that the distraction was him mentally preparing. Others think he was caught between wanting to get clean and being pulled back toward using. Still others suggest he was dealing with something private, something that had nothing to do with drugs or death. But Savage had a different theory, one he only shared years later in a podcast interview in 2019. "I think Kurt was trying to leave," Savage said. "Not leave the interview. Leave everything. I think in those final weeks, he was planning to disappear, to walk away from Nirvana, from fame, from all of it, and I think someone was helping him plan it." Savage had no proof, just instinct. Just the memory of Kurt's behavior in that conference room, the constant door watching, the anxiety, the sense that he needed to be somewhere else. When someone is planning to end their life, Savage explained, they usually disengage. They stop caring about being on time, about appointments, about obligations. But Kurt wasn't disengaged. He was hyper-engaged with something we couldn't see, something that mattered more than the interview, more than his public responsibilities. The woman in the garden, the mysterious meetings, the rushed endings to interviews and photo shoots. Savage believed they all pointed to the same conclusion. Kurt Cobain was planning something, and he needed help to do it. Whether that something was escape or death, Savage couldn't say. Maybe Kurt himself didn't know yet. Maybe in those final weeks he was weighing options, trying to decide which exit to take. The tape of the 6-minute interview still exists. Savage donated it to a music archive in 2015. Anyone can listen to it now. Hear Kurt's voice. Hear the long pauses. Hear the moment he stands up and says, "I think we're done." But what you can't hear on the tape is what Savage heard in the room. The urgency, the anxiety, the sense that Kurt Cobain was running out of time and knew it. "I've thought about that interview for 25 years, Savage said in 2019. And the thing that haunts me most isn't what Kurt said, it's what he didn't say. There was a sentence forming in his mind when I asked that last question. What would you tell your listeners? He almost answered it honestly. I could see him considering it. Then he gave me the deflection instead. Stop listening, find something else." Savage believes Kurt's real answer would have been different, would have been true, would have been the thing he couldn't say out loud because once he said it, there would be no taking it back. "I think he wanted to say, 'I'm sorry,'" Savage reflected. "I think he wanted to apologize for what he was about to do. Whether that was disappearing or dying, I don't know, but I think he knew it was coming. And that interview, those 6 minutes, that was him trying to find the courage to say goodbye without actually saying it." 36 days later, Kurt Cobain was found dead in the greenhouse above his garage. The official ruling was suicide. Case closed. But John Savage never stopped wondering about that woman in the garden, about what she handed to Kurt, about where Kurt was going when he cut the interview short. "Maybe it doesn't matter," Savage said. "Maybe it was just a bad day for an interview. Maybe I'm reading too much into it because I know how the story ends." He paused. "But I was there. I saw his face. And I know what I saw." Kurt Cobain was waiting for something. And on March 1st, 1994, at 2:47 p.m., it finally arrived. The 6-minute interview wasn't supposed to be significant. It was supposed to be a routine publicity session, 30 minutes of standard questions and deflective answers. Instead, it became a window into Kurt Cobain's final weeks. A glimpse of someone caught between two choices, neither of them good. And the thing Kurt never said during that interview, the answer he almost gave before switching to the safer deflection, remains unknown. Lost in the space between what was asked and what was answered, between the life he had and the exit he was planning, John Savage still has nightmares sometimes. In them, he's back in that conference room. The tape recorder is running. He asks the final question. And this time, Kurt doesn't deflect. This time, Kurt tells the truth, says what he really wanted to say. But when Savage wakes up, he can never remember what Kurt said in the dream. The words dissolve as soon as consciousness returns, leaving only the echo of a voice saying something important, something true, something that might have changed everything if it had been spoken aloud. The 6-minute interview. The last time Kurt Cobain sat down with a journalist and pretended everything was normal. The last time he went through the motions of being a rock star doing publicity. The last time he almost told the truth. And then the door opened, and he left. And 36 days later, he was gone.